The heat had a weight that afternoon of 1886, the kind that pressed against skin and bone until breathing itself felt like work. The prairie stretched wide and silver under a sun that had burned the color out of everything it touched. Grass whispered in dry voices. The air carried the faint rattle of iron from the railway ahead, that high, restless hum that never stopped. Isaiah Cole rode slow, the reins loose in his hand, his bay horse Sable picking its way through the brittle scrub. Sweat gathered beneath the collar of his shirt, the salt of it stinging the old scar on his shoulder. He'd learned long ago to live with silence, but this silence felt wrong, tight, waiting. Then came the sound that tore it open. A scream. Not the kind born of distance or fright, but raw, close, human. The sort that ripped through the air like wire pulled too tight. Isaiah pulled hard on the reins. Sable's ears shot forward. The land held its breath. He turned toward the sound before thought could catch up, spurring the horse into a gallop. Dust lifted in thick curls behind him. The ground trembled faintly, a pulse running through the hooves and up his legs. The iron in the rails began to sing louder now, carrying the promise of a train still far but moving fast. His eyes narrowed beneath the brim of his hat. In the shimmer of heat ahead, something flickered, motionless, pale against the dirt. At first he thought it might be a rag of laundry blown from some distant line. But then the light steadied. He saw arms, a body. The scream came again, thinner now, cracking apart at the end. He leaned low, the wind burning his face, the sound of hooves quickening into a rhythm that matched the rails. Sable's breath came harsh and loud, but Isaiah didn't slow. He felt that old ache in his shoulder where the explosion had thrown him years ago, the day the line crew lost a man under a falling beam. The memory came in a flash, metal shrieking, a friend's shout swallowed by dust, and then it was gone, swallowed by the urgency of now. The horizon shimmered. The rails ran like a blade toward it, trembling under the weight that was still miles away but closing. Beside them lay the shape he'd seen. A woman, bound across the tracks, dress torn, skin streaked with grit. Her wrists were tied to one rail, her ankles to the other. A faded bundle lay on her chest, moving faintly with her breath. He dropped from the saddle before the horse stopped, knees jarring, heart pounding in his ears. Her eyes found him, wide, glassy, but steady. They didn't plead. They just held. He cut at the knots with his knife, rope stiff and frayed, biting into his fingers. The hum beneath the rails deepened into a rumble. He could hear the whistle now, low and distant, building in pitch. He sliced through the ties around the bundle first. The cloth loosened, and a baby's cry rose, thin and shocked, but alive. The sound hit him harder than the heat. He freed her wrists, then her feet, pulling her clear of the rails as the train broke the horizon, black smoke boiling behind it. He felt the vibration crawl up through the soles of his boots as he lifted her. The baby was between them now, warm, tiny, fragile as a breath. He turned, running with all the power left in his legs, the roar of the engine chasing them. A rush of steam and grit slammed across his back as they cleared the track. The world became a wall of iron, thunder, and heat. He kept his arms locked around her, around the child, until the last car blurred past and the sound began to die. The silence that followed felt almost holy. He set her down in the grass, easing her gently so the baby stayed close against her chest. Her breathing came in quick, broken pulls. Her eyes, still fixed on him, held something between disbelief and defiance. He looked down at the rope burns along her wrists. The blood and dust mingled there. She tried to speak, but no sound came. Only a tremor of her lips and a small movement of her hand toward the child. Isaiah glanced toward the horizon where the train had vanished, then back at her. "You're safe," he said, voice low, almost unsure. The word safe felt heavy, like it hadn't been spoken aloud in years. She closed her eyes at that, as if the sound itself allowed her to fall back into her own body. When her hand dropped away, something caught the sun on her wrist. A strip of blue ribbon, frayed and dusty, but clean where the rope had rubbed it. She kept her fingers near it even in half-consciousness, like it was the last thing tethering her to the world. Isaiah lifted her again, one arm around the woman, the other cradling the child. Sable nickered softly as they approached, the horse's dark eyes following every move. The heat shimmered off the rails behind them, the echo of metal still humming faint beneath the earth. As he mounted with his burden, he looked once more down the line. The track ran straight into the distance, a silver scar under the sun, straight and merciless, like time itself. He turned the horse west. The prairie wind met them head-on, tasting of dust and something else. Change, maybe, or warning. He didn't look back again. The sun hadn't softened by the time Isaiah reached the slope beyond the tracks. The air shimmered in waves that bent the world, made it seem like the land itself was breathing slow. Behind him, the rails still rang, echo fading in the heat. He stopped only long enough to shift the woman's weight. The child pressed between them, a small warmth against his chest. Sable's coat glistened under the light, muscles trembling from the gallop. But the horse steadied beneath Isaiah's voice, a low murmur, almost like prayer. The woman stirred once, her breath catching in a rasp. The blue ribbon flashed at her wrist again, a small streak of color in a world made of dust and steel. He didn't ask her name. He didn't need to. There was something about the way she clutched the child, even unconscious, that told him more than words could. He'd seen men hold rifles with less certainty. The land rolled out flat and endless, save for a scatter of mesquite and the thin silver line of the riverbed gone dry. Wind dragged at his hat brim, carrying the smell of iron, of burnt grass, of something sharp and final. He felt it slide through him. The old memory, unwelcome. A blast from years ago, the hiss before the detonation, the shout that came too late, and the rain of gravel and iron shards. A man's hand, reaching once, then gone. Isaiah blinked, and it was just heat again. Sable's steady gait beneath him, the woman's head leaning against his shoulder, her hair stiff with dust, smelling faintly of smoke and milk. He adjusted her carefully, shielding the baby from the sun with his arm. "Easy," he murmured. "We're near." The sound of his own voice startled him. It had been days since he'd spoken more than a word to anyone. The ridge broke at last, revealing a shallow basin, and beyond it, a lone cottonwood tree bent sideways by years of wind. Isaiah guided Sable down the slope and stopped in its shade. He eased the woman down, into the grass, the baby still bundled tight against her chest. The leaves above them trembled, throwing fractured light across their faces. Her eyes fluttered open, glazed, but aware. She looked at him without fear, which unsettled him more than panic would have. He offered a canteen. She didn't take it, just watched the water drip down the metal spout. "You'll drink when you're ready," he said. Her lips parted as if to answer, but no sound came. The baby shifted, making a small, fragile noise. She turned toward it instantly, pressing her face to the bundle. The tenderness of that motion, pure, instinctive, cut through Isaiah like wind through wheat. He squinted toward the horizon. The dust from the train had finally settled. Nothing moved. Still, he felt the hum of the rails even from here, like a heartbeat buried under earth. It would fade by nightfall, he told himself. The sound always did. He tore a strip from his sleeve, dipped it into the canteen, and cleaned the dried blood from her wrists. Rope burns had carved half-moons into the skin. When he brushed the edge of the blue ribbon, she caught his hand. Not tight, just enough to stop him. Her eyes flicked down, a faint shake of her head. He understood. Whatever that ribbon meant, it wasn't for him to touch. The light began to tilt, the gold deepening, the wind cooling by degrees. He lifted her again, careful of the child, and mounted. Sable started forward, hooves thudding soft against the packed earth. The prairie stretched ahead, a long breath of emptiness leading west toward home. He spoke more to himself than her. "You'll rest soon." She didn't answer, but her hand, limp a moment before, shifted against his chest. He felt the faintest pressure, trust, or exhaustion, or both. By the time they reached the old wagon trail, the sky had turned the color of pewter, clouds bruised with foam. Evening. Somewhere far behind them, a coyote called once, its cry trailing off into the vast, unbroken quiet. Isaiah urged Sable into a slow trot, keeping his eyes fixed on the low ridge ahead where Blue Mesa Ranch waited. A hawk circled overhead, its wings slicing the last of the light. He followed it until it disappeared behind the rise, the world dimming to copper and blue. When he looked down again, the woman was watching him. Her lips moved soundlessly, and for a second, he thought she was praying. Then he realized it was something simpler. She was counting the baby's breaths, each one small and uneven. He nodded once, though she couldn't see his face clearly. The motion steadied him anyway. The land darkened by degrees, the first star trembling into view. He could see the faint glow where the ranch lantern burned, a warm speck in all that distance. He let out a breath he hadn't known he'd been holding. The air cooled as they rode, carrying the smell of rain that would never fall. He thought of the track behind them, the way it had hummed beneath his boots, the straight silver scar running east to nowhere. He wondered if some things were meant to stay that way. Straight, cold, never bending. Sable climbed the last incline, hooves crunching over dry clay. The cottonwoods by the ranch shimmered faintly in the wind, their leaves flashing like coins. Isaiah shifted his hold, keeping the child close, the woman safe against his shoulder. The first firefly blinked near the fence line, a flicker of light in the gathering dusk. For a heartbeat, it looked like a spark thrown from the rails. He didn't know which was more haunting, the sound of the train still echoing in his chest, or the silence that had come after. He touched the reins, whispering to Sable, and the horse answered with a low snort. The prairie opened before them, quiet, endless, waiting. Somewhere ahead, the house lamp burned steady, and somewhere behind, the world they'd left kept running straight as iron. He didn't look back. The light had turned the color of honey by the time Isaiah rode down into the valley. Blue Mesa lay quiet beneath the slanting sun, its cottonwoods whispering against the wind. The fences caught the glow like dull brass, and from the porch of the main house the first lamp was already burning. Smoke rose from the chimney in a thin, lazy thread. Sable's hooves clopped slow along the dirt path, the rhythm softer now, measured. The woman in Isaiah's arms had drifted between sleep and half-consciousness. The baby was a small weight against her chest, breathing in short, uneven sighs. When the gate creaked open, its sound carried across the stillness like a sigh from the land itself. Alma Reyes stepped out onto the porch. Her hands were rough, stained with the day's work, but her eyes were quick, sharp beneath the brim of her hat. "You bringin' ghosts home now, Isaiah?" she asked, though her tone held more wonder than reproach. "Not ghosts," he said quietly. "The living." Alma came down the steps, her skirt brushing the dust. She didn't ask more, didn't waste a heartbeat on judgment. Instead, she reached for the baby first, the way only someone who'd held life before could. The child whimpered once and then settled against her, tiny fists curling at the air. Isaiah carried the woman inside. The boards of the old house creaked in greeting, the scent of cedar and ash thick in the air. He laid her on the narrow bed in the guest room, the sheets clean but worn soft by years. Light from the lamp caught the rope burns on her wrists, turned them into dark rivers against pale skin. "She's hurt," Alma murmured, touching the edge of a wound with practiced gentleness. "And starved near through." She looked up at him. "You find her out there like this?" "On the rails," he said. The words came out heavy. "Tied down, baby on her chest." For a moment, Alma didn't speak. Only the clock on the wall ticked, slow and steady. Then she nodded once, the kind of nod that accepted both the cruelty of the world and the duty to face it. "You did right bringing her." From the kitchen came the sound of boots thumping. Nate, the ranch hand barely past 17, arms full of kindling. He froze in the doorway, eyes wide at the sight of the strangers. "You sure she's breathing?" he asked, almost in a whisper. "She's breathing," Alma said. "Fetch the basin." He did, and the house moved into quiet rhythm. Water warming on the stove, the scrape of metal against wood, Alma's low hum as she worked. Isaiah stood by the doorway, hat in hand, his body still humming from the day's strain. He watched the woman's chest rise and fall, shallow but steady. The ribbon at her wrist had loosened. In the lamplight, it looked like a strip of sky caught in shadow. Alma pressed a damp cloth to the woman's forehead. "She'll sleep now," she said softly. "And you should eat." But Isaiah didn't move. He stood long enough to see the flicker of the lamp settle, long enough to hear the baby's faint sigh from the cradle Alma had made out of his coat and a bundle of quilts. Then he stepped outside. The night had come quietly. Crickets started their song, thin and steady. The air smelled of mesquite and old rain. Isaiah leaned against the post of the porch, the rough wood warm beneath his palm. From here he could see the line of the hills, dark against the fading sky. Somewhere beyond them, the tracks ran straight and cold under the moon. He thought of that sound again. The hum beneath his boots, the rush of metal behind him. It lived in him still, as if the rails carried a memory only he could hear. He rubbed his shoulder, feeling the ridge of the old scar beneath his shirt. Inside, the chair creaked once, then stilled. The house had gone soft with sleep. A faint light shone through the curtain, golden and steady. He could hear Alma's quiet breathing, the baby's tiny stir, and the slower rhythm of the woman's pulse finding its pace again. He reached for his pipe, didn't light it, just held it between his fingers. The stars above were coming alive, slow and deliberate. The wind carried the far-off rattle of a train, distant enough to sound like thunder caught in a bottle. He closed his eyes and listened. Somewhere behind that sound was the voice of a man he'd once worked beside, laughing over nothing, the kind of laughter that always came before tragedy. Isaiah shook the thought away, but not the ache that followed it. A floorboard shifted inside. He turned. Through the window, the woman stirred, eyes flickering open. For a heartbeat, she met his gaze across the dark. No words passed between them. Only a thin line of lamplight, and the shared silence of people who had both heard too much of the world. She blinked, then her eyes closed again. The wind rose once more, brushing across the yard, setting the empty chair rocking with a low, tired sound. Isaiah stayed until the lamp dimmed, until the stars above the mesa grew hard and white. Then he whispered to the night, a promise no one else could hear. "You're safe now." But the sound of the rails lingered anyway, faint and relentless, running somewhere beneath the earth like a secret that refused to rest. Night settled over Blue Mesa like a slow exhale. The lamplight softened, pulling the sharp edges off everything it touched. Outside, the air smelled of dry mint and wood smoke. Inside, the house spoke in quiet ways. The drip of cooling metal, the faint creak of the rocker as Alma watched over the sleeping child. Isaiah sat on the porch steps, elbows on his knees, the brim of his hat pulled low. The stars stretched wide and indifferent above him. Somewhere far beyond the hills, a train called once, its cry thin and lonely, then faded into the dark. He rubbed the back of his neck, the skin still warm from the day's sun. When Alma stepped out, she carried a basin of water that steamed in the chill air. "She's awake," she said simply. "Wants to clean up before she rests proper." Isaiah nodded and rose. Inside, the air felt close, full of the quiet hum of survival. The woman, Eliza, she'd whispered at last, sat on the edge of the bed. Her hair clung to her temples, and her eyes held the dull sheen of someone not yet convinced of safety. Alma worked in silence, wiping the blood and dust from her wrists. When the cloth passed over the old rope burns, Eliza flinched, but said nothing. "Baby's sleeping fine," Alma said, glancing toward the cradle. "You'll both need food soon." Eliza's gaze drifted to the window, where the curtain stirred with the night wind. "This place," she said softly, voice rough as gravel. "Can it be seen from the road?" Isaiah answered before Alma could. "No road worth the name gets close. Folks pass through once, maybe. Then they keep going." She looked at him then. Really looked. The lamplight caught the edges of her face, hollowed by hunger but not weakness. There was something steady in her eyes, the kind of strength that hides under silence. "I just need a place the world can't find," she said. Isaiah nodded toward the back window. "Behind the ridge, there's a mesa that meets the wind. You stand there. All you can see is sky." Something in her shoulders eased. She reached up, touched the loose strand of blue ribbon at her wrist, then glanced away. The small gesture drew Isaiah's eye more than any word could. That ribbon, faded, frayed, yet carefully tied, looked like it had outlasted more than it should have. Alma wrung out the cloth, her hands steady, her tone kind but practical. "Rest now. Tomorrow we'll see what the morning brings." Isaiah backed toward the doorway, ready to leave her to quiet. But as he turned, he saw movement at the bedside. Eliza reaching for the pencil Alma had left near the lamp. She pulled a piece of brown paper from the floor, the torn back of an old ledger. Slowly, she drew. Lines first, bold and dark, then lighter strokes that softened the shape. When she finished, she slid the drawing against the wooden post of the bed. A gate, open wide, leading to a slope of land that rose into endless sky. She looked at it for a long while, her face unreadable, then leaned back. Isaiah didn't speak. He just watched as the lamplight played across the sketch. The open gate caught halfway between memory and wish. Later, when the house had gone still again, he stepped outside. The wind had shifted, carrying the scent of smoke, wood fire, distant but sharp. He lifted his head, scanning the horizon. No glow of flames, only darkness pressing close. Still, he felt something stirring out there, like a season changing before its time. Behind him, The door creaked. Alma stood there, shawl wrapped tight. "Winds turned east," she said. "Means someone's riding that way." Isaiah didn't answer. His eyes stayed on the distance where the land curved into shadow. "Could be nothing," he said. "Could be." Alma's voice was calm, but the way she closed the door said otherwise. He stayed a while longer under the porch roof, watching the sky deepen. The stars over Blue Mesa flickered hard and bright, their light older than anything that lived. Somewhere behind him, the woman and her child slept, the rhythm of their breathing threading softly through the night air. The scent of smoke came again, fainter this time, but real. He pressed a palm against the porch post, feeling the grain beneath his hand, and whispered to the dark, "Not tonight." Then he sat, waiting for the wind to decide what it wanted to carry next. By morning, the wind had shifted again. It came thin from the east, dry and restless, the kind that carried gossip across miles of dust. Isaiah saddled Sable just after dawn, the world still gray with unrisen light. Alma watched from the porch, arms folded in her apron. "You'll ride for town?" she asked. He nodded. "Supplies are low, and I want word." "Word of what?" He looked toward the ridge where the rails glinted faintly in the early sun. "Whatever's following the smoke." The road to town was long and near empty, a trail carved by wagon wheels and wind. The prairie had gone pale under weeks of heat, its colors washed to the hue of bone. Sable's gait was steady, the only sound the soft rhythm of hooves against dirt. Isaiah's thoughts rode quiet beside him, until the first buildings of Copper Bend rose from the plain, roofs dulled by dust and time. The blacksmith's hammer beat a steady pulse somewhere down the street. A dog barked once and stopped. Isaiah tied Sable outside Whitaker's store, then stepped into the dim cool. The place smelled of leather, coffee, and the faint spice of tobacco. Whit looked up from the counter, his beard silvered, eyes sharp. "Well, I'll be damned," he said. "Didn't think I'd see you 'fore harvest." "Needed a few things." Isaiah dropped his list on the wood. Flour, salve, blankets, and one strip of blue ribbon. Whit raised an eyebrow at the last item. "Ribbon?" "For a child," Isaiah said simply. The older man nodded, began gathering what he could reach. "Heard some talk," he said after a moment, lowering his voice. "Two riders came through yesterday. Owen Pike, Clay Mercer. They were asking about a woman. Said she had a babe, maybe a week old. They spent money like they wanted someone to remember 'em." Isaiah's jaw tightened. "They still in town?" "Nah. Rode east by sundown. But they ain't the type to give up a trail once they've caught it." Whit looked at him carefully. "You know something about that?" Isaiah's eyes shifted to the window. Outside, the street lay still, the dust rising lazy around a stray mule. "Just stories," he said softly, "same as you." Whit leaned closer. "Then hear this one, friend. Keep your gates closed. Out here, that's the only law we got left." Isaiah paid in silence, loaded the bundle onto Sable's saddle, and started home. The sun climbed slow, turning the road to a glare. He rode with his hat pulled low, scanning the horizon the way a man does when he's learned not to trust an open field. Halfway back, he reined in. The prairie was quiet, too quiet. The kind of quiet that means something's holding its breath. Then he heard it. A faint beat of hooves, steady, far off, but following. He couldn't see them through the shimmer, but the rhythm was there, matched to his own. He urged Sable into a lope, neither hurrying nor slowing, just listening. By late afternoon, Blue Mesa came into view, the cottonwoods swaying against the white sky. The air smelled faintly of smoke again, though no fire burned. Alma stood by the porch, a hand shading her eyes. "Town's the same," Isaiah said as he dismounted, setting down the goods. "But there's talk riding with the wind." Alma's gaze held his for a long second. "Men?" "2, maybe more. They're looking." Inside, the house was quiet. Eliza sat by the window, the baby asleep against her shoulder. She turned when Isaiah entered, eyes quick to read the set of his face. "Trouble?" she asked. "Not yet," he said, "but close enough to matter." She nodded once, no tremor in her voice. "Then we keep the child from the windows." Isaiah met her eyes, surprised by the steadiness there. "You've done this before," he said. "Survived?" Her mouth curved, but not into a smile. "Too many times." He wanted to say something, reassure her, promise her safety, but the words felt thin. Instead, he set the blue ribbon on the table between them. "For Ruth," he said. "Or for you." Eliza's fingers brushed it gently. The color seemed too bright for the dim light of the room. "It's for both," she said. Outside, the wind picked up, whistling through the fence line, rattling the loose tin on the barn. It sounded almost like a voice carried far across the plain, one that hadn't forgotten her. Isaiah turned toward the sound. "They'll find their way here sooner or later," he murmured. "Then we'll be ready," Alma said from the doorway, her voice calm, steady as the land itself. Isaiah stepped onto the porch, watching the horizon where dust rose faint and uncertain. The rails caught the evening sun, flashing once like a blade before fading back into shadow. He rested his hand on the post, the wood warm beneath his palm, and felt the faint tremor of hooves too distant to see. The world was holding its breath again. Morning broke pale and windless. The clouds hung low, heavy with the promise of rain that never quite came. Isaiah stood in the yard, one hand on Sable's neck, the other resting on the gatepost. The air tasted of iron, still, sharp, waiting. The sound reached him first, the slow, rolling beat of hooves. Not many, but close enough to carry weight. Dust rose on the horizon, faint as breath. He watched without moving, jaw set, until the shapes took form. 2 riders. Owen Pike, broad through the shoulders, beard rough as wire. Clay Mercer beside him, lean and narrow-eyed, a snake's smile carved into his face. They stopped just outside the gate. The fence line creaked in the wind. Isaiah didn't raise his rifle. It leaned untouched by the porch door. He didn't need it. Not yet. "Cole," Owen called. His voice was rough, shaped by whiskey and miles. We're looking for a woman passed through here. Might have had a child with her. Isaiah stayed where he was. You're on my land, he said evenly. Say what you've got to say from there. Clay shifted in the saddle, the leather groaning. We mean no harm, he said. Just collectin' what's ours. Isaiah's hand brushed the gatepost, his thumb tracing the smooth groove worn there by years of use. You tie what's yours to a rail and leave it to the train? His voice came low, steady. Then I reckon you don't own much worth keepin'. Clay's smirk faltered. Owen spat into the dirt. Don't get noble, Cole. You don't know the story. Don't need to. Isaiah's gaze didn't shift. I know the sound a man makes when he means to kill. Heard it enough to tell. The wind stirred, lifting the hem of his coat. Behind him, the door creaked softly. Eliza stood just inside, Ruth pressed against her chest, her shadow long across the floorboards. The baby slept, unaware. She said nothing, but her eyes were steady, fixed on the men beyond the fence. The blue ribbon at her wrist caught the weak sunlight, one thread of color in all that gray. Owen saw it. His expression changed, just a flicker, something like shame or recognition, but it passed. She don't belong here, he said. Ain't safe for her, nor for you. Isaiah's fingers curled slightly around the wood. Safety's not yours to measure. For a moment, the air seemed to hold still. Even the horseflies stopped their circle. Clay's eyes darted to the rifle by the porch, calculating distance. Owen's hand twitched near his belt, then stilled. The silence stretched until it felt like a wire pulled tight between them. Leave, Isaiah said quietly. The way you came. Owen shifted, his face hardening. You'll regret this, Cole. Maybe, Isaiah replied, his tone even as stone. But not today. Clay muttered something under his breath, turned his horse first. Owen hesitated a second longer, then pulled the reins. The two men rode off, the dust curling up behind them, fading slow into the heat. Isaiah didn't move until they were small against the horizon. Only then did he let his hand fall from the gate. Inside, Eliza still stood in the doorway. They'll be back, she said, her voice quiet, stripped of fear. Maybe, Isaiah said, but the gate'll remember. He looked at her then, truly looked. The sunlight fell across her face, showing the exhaustion, the defiance, the thin line of determination that ran through both. Ruth stirred against her, gave a soft sigh, and Eliza drew the child closer. Isaiah reached for the latch, ran his thumb along the groove again. The wood was warm from his touch, the metal cool beneath. Out here, he said softly, almost to himself. A gate's more than a door. It's a line. The wind rose again, carrying the smell of dust and far-off rain. Somewhere beyond the ridge, thunder rolled once, deep and distant. Alma stepped onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron, eyes tracking the horizon where the riders had vanished. They'll test that line, she said. I know, Isaiah replied. Alma's gaze drifted to Eliza, then back to him. Then we keep it strong. Isaiah nodded, the faintest curve of resolve in his jaw. The land around them was silent again, but not at rest. Even the rails far off seemed to hum with memory. He looked once more toward the east, where the dust was settling slow as ash, and said, almost under his breath, "They'll come back, but next time they won't find her alone." The sky had gone a flat, pale color, and the wind brought with it a whisper of rain that never fell. The world held its breath once more, balanced on the thin edge between calm and storm. The afternoon sun came soft and gold, brushing the valley in quiet light. The storm that had threatened never broke. It only left a hush, like the land itself was holding its breath after an argument it didn't win. The rails far away shimmered faintly, straight as ever, but the air around Blue Mesa had changed. Eliza stood at the gate, one hand resting on the rough wood, the other cradling Ruth against her shoulder. The baby slept, small and warm, her breath soft against Eliza's neck. Isaiah joined her without a word, his boots whispering over the dry grass. For a while they both watched the horizon, where the dust had long since settled. "They'll come back," she said. It wasn't fear, only a statement of fact. He nodded. "Maybe. But if they do, this gate'll remember who they are." Her eyes followed the line of the fence. "You talk about it like it's a love." "It is," he said quietly. "Everything out here remembers what passes through it. Wind, hoof prints, even promises." She looked down at her wrist. The blue ribbon had frayed almost to thread, the edges torn by rope and travel. Carefully, she pulled it loose. "This was tied to me when they left me on the tracks," she said. "Guess I kept it 'cause I didn't want them to have it." Isaiah held out his hand. "Let's give it a better reason." She hesitated, then placed it in his palm. His fingers closed around the ribbon, rough skin brushing the delicate fabric. He walked to the gate, tied it firm around the iron latch, and drew the knot tight. The cloth fluttered in the breeze, bright against the dust. "Now," he said, "it belongs to this place." Eliza's throat tightened, not with sorrow, but something she couldn't name. A quiet strength settled between them. The ribbon moved slightly in the wind, like it was breathing with them. Time 1000 mus. Alma watched from the porch, one hand shading her eyes. "That's a fine thing you've done," she called softly. "A house don't stand on boards alone. It stands on what people choose to keep." Isaiah turned to Eliza. "Come," he said. "I want to show you something." They walked behind the barn, where the land sloped toward a narrow draw. From there, a thin line of water wound through the sage, barely a trickle, but clear and steady. He crouched beside it, dipping his fingers into the cool stream. "This here's the spring," he said. "Been running longer than the ranch itself." Eliza knelt beside him, touching the water as if it might vanish. "I didn't think there was any left this far out." "There's always some," Isaiah said. "You just have to follow the ground till it bends. Straight things break easier. Water knows better." She smiled faintly. You think the same's true for people? He met her gaze. It's the only reason any of us are still standing. They sat there a moment, the sound of the small stream whispering between stones. Ruth stirred in her arms, sighed, and went still again. The smell of sage hung thick in the warm air. For the first time since she'd come to Blue Mesa, Eliza felt her lungs fill all the way. When they returned to the house that the light had softened to amber, Nate was hammering loose boards by the corral, his rhythm steady and light-hearted. Alma stirred a pot by the stove, humming under her breath. The sound filled the air with something domestic, fragile, and real. Eliza paused on the porch, her eyes drifting to the gate. The ribbon moved gently, twisting in the slow wind. It seemed to hum with the same low rhythm as the spring, steady, unbroken. Isaiah leaned against the post beside her. You did right, giving it up, he said. It doesn't feel like giving up, she answered. Time, 400 pems, feels like leaving a mark. He looked at her then, his eyes dark under the brim of his hat. That's all a promise really is, he said. A mark that stays put. She turned back toward the horizon. The air had grown heavy again, clouds thickening beyond the ridge. A faint growl of thunder drifted across the plain. Storm's buildin', Isaiah murmured. Or something else, she said. They stood that way for a long moment, watching the sky change colors, the smell of rain rising in the distance. Then the thunder cracked, low, sharp, rolling through the mesa like a voice calling from somewhere deep. The horses stirred in the pen, stamping nervously. Isaiah straightened, his eyes on the east. That ain't weather, he said. Eliza tightened her hold on Ruth. Then what is it? He didn't answer. The sound came again, fainter now, like hooves pounding far off, swallowed by wind. He looked back at the gate, the ribbon fluttering, the latch shining in the dying light. And he knew. Maybe the line's about to be tested, he said. And the sky, heavy with dust and rain, gave no answer at all. Evening came slower that day, the light dragging its feet across the fields, as if the sun itself didn't trust the dark waiting behind the hills. The air was thick with that strange quiet that comes before the world decides whether to rest or fight. Eliza sat beneath the cottonwood by the porch, Ruth asleep in her lap. The leaves above her clattered softly, throwing small patches of light across her face. Alma sat nearby with her mending, needle dipping in and out of fabric with the steadiness of someone who had long made peace with repetition. After a time, Alma said, You look lighter today. The lines on your face don't pull so hard. Eliza gave a thin smile. I didn't think I'd ever sit still again. Sometimes stillness is the hardest thing, Alma replied. She tied a knot, bit the thread clean, and looked out toward the horizon. Isaiah says the land keeps memory. You believe that? Eliza's hand moved slowly, brushing Ruth's hair back. I do now. Feels like this place remembers every cry, every silence. Her voice faltered. And maybe that's why it feels safe, to be remembered and not chased. The wind shifted, colder now, carrying the faint smell of rain, or maybe smoke. Alma set her sewing aside, eyes thoughtful. You never said who left you on those rails. Eliza's breath caught. She stared at her hands, fingers tracing invisible scars. His kin, she said finally. My husband's people. The words came haltingly at first, then gained strength as she forced them through. He wrote me letters, told me to come west. When I found him, he'd built a life with another woman. His brothers said I'd shame them, that my child wasn't fit to bear the name. They waited until night, bound me while Ruth slept, said the train would do what they couldn't stomach. Her voice fell away. The sound of the wind filled the gap. Alma's eyes softened. You survived. That's its own defiance. Eliza shook her head. Surviving isn't the same as living. I'm still learning the difference. From the porch, Nate appeared, carrying a handful of wildflowers, purple asters, rough and simple. Ma'am, he said shyly, placing them on the step beside her. Figured the baby might like color. Eliza looked up, caught off guard. Thank you, she whispered. When Nate had gone, she stared at the flowers a long time, then smiled. The first smile that didn't hurt. The sky deepened to copper. Isaiah worked in the yard, shaping a cradle from juniper wood. The steady rasp of his knife echoed through the quiet. Each stroke left a scent of resin in the air, clean and sharp. Eliza watched him through the fading light, her fingers absently rocking Ruth. When Alma went inside to stir the stew, Eliza spoke softly, almost to herself. He's carving something that'll last longer than both of us. Men like him don't build things to last, Alma said from the doorway. They build them to carry meaning. The day dimmed into the kind of dusk that blurs edges, that makes distance hard to judge. Eliza rose and carried Ruth inside. The fire crackled low, its glow painting the walls in soft gold. Isaiah still worked outside, his silhouette cutting clean lines against the horizon. Ruth whimpered once, and Eliza soothed her, humming a tune that came from nowhere she could remember. The sound steadied her heartbeat. When she looked down, she saw that Ruth's small hand had caught a fold of her sleeve, holding tight even in sleep. Later, she stepped to the window. The yard lay bathed in silver light. The half-finished cradle sat under the awning, Isaiah gone to check the horses. For the first time, she saw the ranch not as refuge, but as a promise being built piece by piece. Wood, breath, faith. Then, faint but unmistakable, she heard it. Hoofbeats. Not close, not rushing, but moving steady across the plain. Counting, distance. She held her breath. The sound faded after a moment, lost to the night wind. But she knew it wasn't imagination. The horizon had a pulse now, one that matched the old terror in her bones. Isaiah returned a minute later, wiping his hands on a rag. You heard it too? He asked quietly. Yes. He nodded once, no surprise in his face. They're measuring how close they can get. What will you do? What I always do, he said. Stand where I have to. She looked at him, the lamplight catching the edge of his scar, turning it to a pale streak of memory. "You don't owe me this." He paused, eyes steady on hers. "I don't do it 'cause I owe you," he said. "I do it 'cause no one else should have to live like that." Eliza felt something shift, small but deep, a thread pulling loose from fear, replaced by something steadier, quieter. She nodded, then stepped back from the window. Outside, the wind rose again, lifting dust from the ground. The night smelled of sage and distant thunder. Isaiah went to the gate, placed his hand on the latch where the blue ribbon still fluttered. It moved against his fingers like breath. He stood there until the wind settled, until even the echoes of hooves were gone. But the silence that followed didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like a warning gently spoken. Night pressed close around Blue Mesa, quiet, but not still. The wind had died, leaving only the soft hiss of crickets and the creak of the barn boards shifting with the cooling air. Inside, the lamps burned low. The room smelled of oil, pine sap, and the faint sweetness of milk. Isaiah sat at the table with a spread of old maps before him. Thin, yellowed pages marked with water lines and measurements in his rough handwriting. He traced one of the penciled paths with his thumb, following how the underground streams bent beneath the dry land. Across from him, Eliza watched in silence, Ruth asleep in the cradle nearby. "That's how you keep the grass alive," he said finally. "You dig where the water curves, not where you think it should go." Eliza tilted her head, studying the faint blue veins on the paper. "You've mapped this by memory." "By listening," he said. "The ground talks, if you know how to hear it." She looked at the lines again, then reached for a scrap of paper and a stick of charcoal. With slow, careful strokes, she drew a winding mark beside one of his straight ones, letting the line sway and twist. "Like this?" Isaiah watched the curve take shape, soft, deliberate, alive. "Yeah," he murmured, "exactly like that." The two maps met on the table, his straight line, her bending one. Together, they formed something new, neither forced nor wild. When she set the charcoal down, their fingers brushed, just lightly, but enough to pull the air taut between them. Outside, a nightbird called once, low and hollow. Eliza broke the quiet. "You work even when there's nothing left to fix." He smiled faintly, eyes on the cradle. "Always something worth building. Keeps a man steady." She followed his gaze. The cradle, half finished days ago, now gleamed with fresh polish. The scent of juniper filled the room, clean, sharp, like rain on dry wood. Ruth slept within it, her tiny fist curled around the edge of a blanket. The sight drew a warmth through Eliza's chest that surprised her. Quiet, but certain. She touched the cradle's edge. "It's beautiful." "It's meant to last," Isaiah said. "That's all beauty is, really. Something that keeps holding when everything else lets go." He turned back to the maps, pretending to read, but his attention stayed on her hands, small, steady, unflinching now as they traced the grain of the wood. Alma appeared at the doorway, polishing the old carbine that had hung above the hearth for years. "You two keepin' watch?" she asked, voice low. Isaiah glanced up. Just listening to the land. She smiled without humor. The land ain't the only thing whispering tonight. Her eyes flicked toward the window, where the curtain trembled from a passing gust. Heard voices on the far trail before dark. Not loud, but sharp. Eliza froze. They're close? Maybe not yet, Alma said, setting the rifle on the table. But they're coming. Men who do evil don't ride far without it catching up to them. Isaiah nodded slowly. Then we'll be ready. Alma wiped her hands on her apron and left the room. The door swung shut behind her, leaving only the sound of Ruth's breathing and the steady rhythm of the ticking clock. Eliza reached for the map again, but her fingers lingered over the edge of Isaiah's drawing instead. You ever get tired of defending things that ain't yours? He looked at her, his voice soft. They are now. The words hung between them, simple, unadorned, truer than any vow could be. Eliza's throat tightened. She turned back toward the cradle, brushing her knuckles along Ruth's tiny arm. The baby sighed, half smiling in her sleep. Maybe you're right, she said. Maybe water and people both find their way when they stop trying to be straight. Isaiah leaned back in his chair, the wood creaking beneath him. The lamp flame trembled, throwing gold across his face. Straight lines make good rails, he said, but they don't make good lives. For a moment, neither spoke. The house felt alive. The breath of 3 people and a sleeping child woven into its stillness. Then, from somewhere beyond the pasture, a murmur rose. Not thunder this time, not wind. Voices, arguing, low and rough, carried by the night air. Isaiah stiffened. Eliza turned toward the window, every muscle taut. You hear that? He nodded once, already standing. They're closer than before. She gathered Ruth, heart hammering. What will you do? Isaiah's eyes shifted to the rifle by the door, then to the ribbon on the gate visible through the window, pale blue in the moonlight. Same as the water, he said quietly. I'll bend, but I won't break. The voices outside grew faint again, swallowed by distance. But the echo lingered, like the first tremor before a storm. Isaiah walked to the window, hand resting on the sill. The night stretched wide before him, the horizon silvered under a thin moon. He thought of the gate, the ribbon, the cradle, all of them fragile, all of them proof that something worth keeping still lived here. Behind him, Eliza's voice came soft, almost a whisper. You think they'll come tonight? He didn't turn. Maybe. Or maybe they're waiting for the light. Either way, they'll find us ready. Outside, a coyote cried once, and then the land went still again. The cradle creaked gently as Ruth shifted in sleep, the sound small but grounding. Isaiah blew out the lamp, and darkness folded around them like a held breath. Dawn came thin and silver, the kind that carried no warmth, only light. Dew clung to the fence line, and the cottonwoods whispered like they already knew what was coming. Isaiah stood in the yard before the sun cleared the ridge, the rifle clean, oiled, and resting against the porch post. He didn't hold it. He didn't need to. Not yet. Nate came riding fast from the west pasture, dust trailing behind him like smoke. "They're coming, Mr. Cole," he called, voice cracking. "4 of 'em this time. 2 new faces." Isaiah nodded once. "Go inside, son. Stay with Alma and the lady." The boy hesitated. "You gonna—" "I'll be right here," Isaiah said. His tone ended the question. Nate swallowed hard and bolted for the house. The hoofbeats reached the yard before the light did. Owen Pike rode first. Same beard, same eyes shadowed by anger. Clay Mercer flanked him, his smirk thinner now. Behind them came 2 strangers, dust-colored men with restless hands. They stopped just beyond the gate, their horses pawing the ground, nostrils flaring. Isaiah stepped forward until his boots touched the line where shade met light. "You made good time," he said quietly. Owen spat. "We figured we'd save you the trouble of wonderin'." Clay tilted his head. "We ain't here for a fight, Cole. Just for what belongs to us." Isaiah's gaze drifted to the latch, where the blue ribbon fluttered softly. "Ain't nothing on this side of the gate that belongs to you." The taller of the strangers laughed, but it came out thin. "That woman's got a name that ties her to them," he said. "Law says—" "Law," Isaiah cut in. "You don't get to say that word, not after what you did." His voice stayed calm, but the air around it tightened. The men shifted uneasily. Clay's horse tossed its head. "You gonna stand there and talk a train through?" he sneered. "I'll talk as long as it takes," Isaiah said. He placed one hand on the latch, thumb brushing the ribbon. "Cross this gate and you'll find out what my words mean." Behind him, the house door creaked open. Eliza stepped into the light. Ruth held close to her chest. Her hair caught the dawn, a faint shimmer against the gray. She didn't hide this time. Owen's eyes found her, and something flickered there. Memory, regret, maybe shame. "Eliza," he said hoarsely, "you shouldn't have come out here." She stood still. "You shouldn't have tied me to that rail." Clay barked a laugh, ugly and hollow. "We did what had to be done. A woman that brings shame." Alma's voice cut through from the porch. "Careful how you finish that sentence, son." The sharp click of a hammer followed. She stood behind the old carbine, the barrel angled just off the horizon. For a long heartbeat, no one moved. The air hummed with the quiet weight of decision. Isaiah's hand stayed on the latch, steady as stone. Then Owen exhaled, his shoulders dropping a fraction. "We came to end this clean," he said. "You already ended it," Isaiah answered. "You just don't like how it turned out." Clay's face twisted, but before he could speak, a sound split the silence. A shot. It hit not a man, but the signpost beside the gate. Wood splintered, dust flying. Alma lowered the rifle slightly, her voice calm as prayer. "The land heard that," she said, "and so did God." The men flinched. Even their horses shifted back, uneasy. Owen met Isaiah's eyes one last time. "This ain't over," he muttered. "It is for her," Isaiah replied. They turned their horses, slow at first, then faster as they rode toward the open plain. Dust rose behind them, golden in the new sun. Isaiah watched until they disappeared. The air seemed to breathe again, soft and clean. He let the latch fall back into place, the ribbon trembling once before going still. Eliza was still by the porch, her face unreadable. "You didn't have to risk it," she said. He shook his head. "Didn't feel like a risk." Ruth stirred, letting out a tiny sigh. The sound broke whatever was left between them. Eliza stepped closer, her voice low. "You've given me something I can't repay." Isaiah's eyes softened. "Don't owe me a thing. Just keep breathing free." Alma moved past them, touching the bullet mark on the signpost. "That'll stay," she said, "so the land don't forget who crossed it." Isaiah nodded, then turned toward the open field. The light had grown warmer, spilling over the grass in long bands. The wind was gentle now, and for the first time in days, it smelled like rain that would actually fall. He looked once more at the gate, the ribbon glinting like a heartbeat in the breeze. "It spoke loud enough," he said quietly. "Now maybe it can rest." But in the far distance, where the road bent east, a single dark speck still moved. A rider who hadn't turned away with the others. The horizon swallowed him slow, and Isaiah, though his hand had dropped from the gate, kept his eyes there until the light washed the last trace of dust away. The morning after the standoff came bright and clean, as if the sky had been scrubbed through the night. Dew hung on the grass like glass beads, and the air smelled faintly of cedar and bread baking in the kitchen. For the first time in weeks, Blue Mesa felt unburdened. Isaiah was in the yard early, running his hand down Sable's neck, listening to the steady breath of a horse that had carried him through too many storms. Alma stood on the porch steps with a basket of linens, her voice light but steady. "The preacher'll be by before noon. Don't keep him waitin', Isaiah Cole." Isaiah glanced toward the house. Eliza was at the window, her hair loose, the baby in her arms. The light caught her face in a way that made the moment seem unreal, like she belonged there, and always had. By midday, the sun had risen warm but not harsh. The cottonwood near the creek threw a generous patch of shade over the yard. Alma had laid a simple table beneath it. A loaf of bread, a jug of water, and a tin cup for each of them. Nate stood by the fence, trying not to fidget in his clean shirt. The preacher arrived on horseback, dust clinging to his coat. Josiah Green was an older man with a calm that came from decades of seeing both faith and failure up close. He dismounted slow, shook Isaiah's hand, then turned to Eliza with a kind of quiet respect. "No congregation?" she asked softly. He smiled. "Sometimes the Lord does his work better with just 4 walls of wind." They gathered under the tree. The wind whispered through the leaves, carrying the smell of river silt and sage. Ruth slept in the cradle nearby, her tiny breaths sinking with the rustle overhead. Isaiah and Eliza faced each other, hands joined loosely. There was no music, no ring, only the murmuring cottonwood and the soft bleat of a calf far down the pasture. Josiah opened his Bible but didn't read from it right away. This land has seen too much taken by force, he said, looking between Chinchun, them. So let what's done here be by choice alone. Isaiah's voice was low when he spoke. I promise to keep her and the child safe, to be the ground under their feet, not the fence around them. Eliza's fingers trembled once before tightening around his. And I promise to walk beside you, she said, not behind, not hidden. The preacher closed the book gently. Then what's promised here will outlast the wind. A single leaf fell between them, catching on the cradle's edge before drifting to the ground. Alma smiled and brushed at her eyes, pretending it was the sun making them water. They shared a meal afterward. Roast chicken, cornbread. Alma's apple pie cooled on the windowsill. Nate laughed too loudly at something Alma said, and the sound startled a nearby quail into flight. Even the land seemed to exhale. Later, as the light slanted gold, Eliza walked to the gate. 2 ribbons fluttered there now, one old and frayed, one new and bright. She lifted the ends together, letting them tangle in the wind. The sound of the creek drifted faintly up from below, steady as breath. Isaiah joined her. Preacher said things built on choice last longer, he murmured. She nodded. Then maybe this place'll remember us kindly. He reached for her hand, his thumb brushing the pale scar that crossed her wrist. She didn't pull away. You ever think about going back east? He asked. Eliza looked out at the horizon, the long stretch of land, the thin shimmer of rail. No, she said. East feels like a story that already ended. Then we'll start a new one, Isaiah said. Alma's voice carried from the porch. Sun's droppin'. Come eat the rest before it cools. They turned back, walking slow through the tall grass. Ruth stirred in her cradle, murmured softly, then fell still again. The sky deepened to amber, the kind of light that made even scars look gentle. Before stepping inside, Isaiah paused. You think they'll come back? Eliza's eyes flicked toward the distant tracks, glinting faintly in the fading light. Maybe, she said, but I won't be waiting for them anymore. The preacher mounted his horse, tipping his hat as he rode out across the open field. He called over his shoulder, Straight lines go fast, Cole, but it's the curved ones that last. Isaiah watched him disappear into the horizon, the words sinking deep like seeds. The sound of the creek rose again, soft, eternal. By the time the stars began to show, the cottonwood stood silent over the yard, the 2 ribbons twisting together on the gate, catching the first breath of night. And for once everything, land, house, heart, felt level. Evening fell slow over Blue Mesa, honey-colored and still. The air was thick with the smell of warm earth and apple peel, and the shadows stretched long enough to touch the far fence. Isaiah sat on the porch steps, elbows resting on his knees, watching the sky turn from gold to rose, then to that endless, quiet blue that always seemed to hum with memory. Eliza joined him, the screen door sighing behind her. Ruth slept against her shoulder, the rhythm of her small breaths so even it could have been the ranch's own heartbeat. She eased herself down beside him, her skirt whispering over the wood. For a long while neither spoke. The world around them felt patient, the way land does when it knows it's finally been forgiven. A hawk circled high above, wings stretched wide, gliding without sound. The wind was low and steady, carrying the scent of juniper from the cradle inside and the faint trace of rain from the far ridges. Isaiah glanced toward the gate. The two ribbons fluttered side by side, one faded, one bright, twisting together in the slow evening breeze. "Still holdin'," he murmured. Eliza followed his gaze. "They will," she said. "Some things don't come loose once they've been tied for the right reason." He smiled at that. The kind of smile that comes from deep inside. The kind that doesn't need to show teeth. Guess that's true for people, too. Eliza tilted her head toward him, her voice soft. "I used to think peace was something you had to find. Now I think it's something you make, one breath at a time." "Then we'll keep breathing," he said. Ruth stirred, making a tiny sound between sigh and dream. Eliza adjusted the blanket around her. The lamplight from the house brushed their faces in soft amber. Alma's silhouette moved across the window, closing the shutters with careful hands. Inside, Nate's laughter rose faintly, muffled by wood and distance. The land felt settled, not in triumph, but in belonging. "I used to listen for trains," Eliza said quietly, her eyes on the horizon. "Every night, even when I didn't want to. Couldn't stop hearing that sound in my bones." Isaiah's hand rested over hers. "Still hear it?" "Sometimes," she said. "But it don't scare me now. Just reminds me how far we've come." A pause passed between them, comfortable, unhurried. The hawk dropped lower, then vanished beyond the tree line, leaving only a few drifting feathers that caught the last of the sun. Isaiah leaned back, stretching his legs out on the porch. "Never thought the sound of nothing could feel so good." Eliza smiled, her eyes half closed. "That's how you know it's home." He looked at her for a long moment, then said softly, "You do belong here, Eliza. You and Ruth both." She turned toward him, and for the first time there was no shadow behind her eyes, only stillness. "I know," she whispered. "I finally do." The last light of day gathered around them like a slow tide. Isaiah reached over, his fingers brushing the knot of the ribbons tied to the porch post. A smaller twin of the ones on the gate. The fabric was warm from the sun, soft under his calloused touch. He didn't tie or untie it, just felt it there. A reminder that promises didn't have to be spoken to stay true. The horizon dimmed into indigo. Crickets started their song. Somewhere out in the dark, the faint hum of the railway drifted through the air, so low it might have been imagined. Not a warning this time, just a memory. Life moving on somewhere beyond their reach. Eliza leaned her head against his shoulder. The weight was light, familiar. Ruth's soft breathing filled the quiet between them. Isaiah closed his eyes. The night pressed in, gentle and complete. He could feel the land breathe with them. The rails far away running straight and cold, the spring behind the hill curving easy through the dark. One path carried speed, the other carried life, and for the first time in years, he didn't have to choose. The wind shifted once, cool and kind. The ribbons at the gate stirred, their whisper barely audible, as if the land itself was exhaling at last. Isaiah's hand tightened gently over Eliza's. "We made it," he said. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her silence was full of meaning, soft, steady, whole. Above them, the stars came out one by one, reflected faintly in the baby's closed eyes. And somewhere in that endless western dark, the rails hummed faintly beneath the earth, not with danger, but with the simple truth that life would keep going. For now, though, Blue Mesa slept in peace. Out here on the quiet land, where the wind carries memories more than words, this story comes to rest. Isaiah, Eliza, and little Ruth remind us that even after the hardest storms, peace can still find its way home, sometimes through kindness, sometimes through patience, always through love. It's a simple truth, the kind that grows stronger with time. No one is ever too old or too tired to start again. If this story stirred something in your heart, maybe a memory, or just a gentle kind of hope, we'd love to hear it. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us what it reminded you of, or what you'd still hold on to if life gave you another sunrise like this one. And if you enjoy tales like this, stories of the Old West, of courage, grace, and quiet redemption, please give this video a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the bell so you'll never miss the next story waiting by the firelight. Thank you for spending this time with us. Until we meet again on another Western horizon, stay kind, stay steady, and keep the stories alive.